Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
When the Miami and Erie Canal was completed in 1845, the city of Toledo, Ohio would rapidly expand as an industrial hub. In the 1920s, until the Great Depression hit at the end of that decade, the city had one of the highest rates of industrial growth in the country. While not as hard hit as nearby Cleveland, Detroit, or Gary, it would struggle over the following century as it lost much of its manufacturers. But even back when things were growing, the Glass City had something sinister underneath that shiny exterior. 1925 would prove to be a year of terror for the citizens of Toledo. Just 2 days into the new year, 2 children would perish in a house fire. Several months later, multiple lumber yards in the city would all be torched within a period of hours. When guards were posted outside, the arsonists switched to planting bombs inside homes and tenement buildings. After one bomb exploded in the mailbox of a priest, federal agents entered the investigation, only for the madman seemingly to change tactics yet again the following month. Though largely forgotten about today, beginning May 1925, someone began attacking women on the streets of Toledo. His name was the Toledo Clubber.
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one,
The death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
In the modern age, fact-checking stories is incredibly easy, but 100 years ago was much more difficult. Clickbait may be a recent word, but sensationalizing stories is as old as time. In this respect, many newspapers at the time of the attacks would mix up even the simplest information such as victims' names, ages, and dates of attacks, all in the rush to get the story out took first priority. At one point, they even tried to name him Jack the Clubber after the more famous killer, though it wouldn't stick. It was the night of May 24th, 1925, when 48-year-old divorcee Emma Hatfield left her sisters and began walking home along Ewing Street, when someone pulled her into this alleyway. Shortly after, a passing motorist spotted the naked woman sitting in a daze. The scene was so bloody, it was initially believed she had been hit in the head with an axe, but it would later be determined to be a hammer. Eyewitnesses claimed to have spotted a nude man fleeing from the scene. In the hospital, the woman stated that she knew her attacker, but would not name him, only saying it was not her ex-husband. She would linger in a coma until dying September 9th. About 2.5 weeks prior, on Friday, August 21st, less than a block away, 24-year-old mother of 2 Lydia Baumgartner's body would be found between 2 houses here on Dorr Street. Her body was torn and scratched. Her head, described as beaten to a pulp, was almost severed from her body from multiple knife slices. Police would arrest her husband after neighbors said they had been fighting the night prior. He would eventually be released when it was discovered that Lydia had been pretending to be a detective and warning families in the neighborhood that they should move. Police believed one of these families may have attacked her, but could prove nothing. Exactly 1 month later, the clubber left his first survivor when 50-year-old Beth Hall walked out of her home on Collingwood Avenue to mail a letter. From the shadows, someone hit her on the head and fled, laughing maniacally. The following months saw more non-fatal attacks. Frank Hall's unnamed wife was walking on Putnam Street to her home around here when she was bashed in the nose. 16-year-old Wilma Hoadley was walking home from her job as a telephone operator when the clubber came out from behind a tree on the corner of 20th and Monroe. He hit her multiple times before an approaching car scared him off. Papers reported that she became hysterical anytime the clubber was mentioned. She described her assailant as having a red face and a maniacal laugh. By now, the city was in a frenzy. The American Legion offered volunteers to match the amount of police on patrol. 150 railroad workers were deputized for nightly patrols. Boy Scouts would accompany any woman who had to go out at night, and it was even noted undercover female officers would walk the streets with steel-lined hats. Even so, 30-year-old Frida Drahim was walking home alone from her sister's house on Tecumseh Street mid-November when someone struck her in the back of the head twice, shattering her skull. 17-year-old Raymond Gordon saw the attack happen from about 200 feet away and rushed over. Within minutes, it was said over 100 police officers had surrounded the area, but the clubber got away. Frida was given a 50-50 survival rate, but did manage to recover. Meanwhile, as the stigma of mental health was very much different back then, police were ordered to round up every, quote, mental defective who could possibly have made the attacks. But the very next night, 38-year-old Cora Batchelor was almost at her home on Colfax Street when she was attacked. Today, the area is now where I-75 passes through, but around here, that woman pleaded with the clubber not to attack. He responded by laughing, which she described as the most awful thing I've ever heard. It didn't sound human. Though struck, it was noted that her thick hair and heavy felt saved her from death. Police also noted that she worked at the same telephone company that Wilma Hoadley was employed. Like the city, the killer seems to have been at a fever pitch, and on November 20th, Catherine Knight reported she had almost been attacked when she went to take her trash out of her home that stood here. Police would dismiss her claims, stating she had been excitable after being shell-shocked during World War I and was delusional about her attack. The same night, however, they did acknowledge that Pauline Winover was attacked as she sat in a car here while her friend was inside a corner drugstore. She was saved when the club hit the top of the car instead, and as people rushed to her aid, the clubber dashed up a stairwell to the roof. And here's where the story takes a turn. Witnesses claimed that he jumped off the roof to another that was 18 feet below before dashing to a home. Police entered, but found the back window open. While the truth might have been stretched, the descriptions by witnesses and survivors all were of the same man. He was tall, shaggy with a hooked nose. His wild eyes were accentuated by red painted circles around them. He would shout about hating women and that he was getting even on his faithless wife. More reports of attacks flooded police. Viola Chatham was attacked at a restaurant in Union Station before 2 policemen came to her aid. 18-year-old Lorraine Braun was found lying unconscious near her home on Walbridge Avenue. She stated that she was grabbed from behind and thought she was clubbed on the head as she fell. Police would state that the 4 attacks on Knight, Winover, Chatham, and Brown were unrelated or false, and only the first 6 attacks were by the clubber. On November 29th, 2 hunters found a man in the woods outside of town wielding a large, bloody hammer. Robert August Molnar was brought into custody, but the only survivor to ID him was Cora Batchelor, though she wasn't 100% certain. His confession had some discrepancies, and the blood would prove to be from a chicken, so he was committed to the state hospital but not charged. Another incredulous story came when the residents near Madison and 16th Street awoke one night by the clubber's laugh. They claimed to seen him standing on the roof of 1620 Madison, firing a pistol before sliding backwards off the roof and escaping. The next night, William Brown approached what he mistakenly thought was the front door of his home. As he opened the door, the owner shot him in the face. Police diligently responded to the dozens of calls they received each night, though many turned out to be by, quote, hysterical women. Now nicknamed the Clubber District, Toledo's west side was noted as being completely lit from end to end by porch lights and windows. And perhaps that is why the clubber laid low for around 2 months until January 18th the following year, when 44-year-old divorcee Mary Handley was found in this lot. Living with her brothers next door, they reported a peeper had been looking in their windows the night of her disappearance. She was also suspiciously said to have been on a trip for 2 days prior and to have returned home that night. The following morning, when she left to take her daughter to school, Maddie Sturl found Handley's body in her front yard. She had been gagged, clothing torn, and died of a crushed skull. 1 week later, a bloody hammer was found in a garbage can 2 blocks away, but it was debated if it was the murder weapon due to the fact that a sapling was found cut near the body as though it had been sliced off during the attack. Following her murder, yet again multiple attacks were reported, but none of the descriptions would match that of the clubber, and police theorized that anyone with a grudge against a woman was using his MO for revenge. 26-year-old Lily Dale Croy was a 5th grade teacher at the former Gunkel Elementary School. She was also attending night school at the University of Toledo 2 nights a week, to which she usually drove, but on the night of October 25th, 1926, she decided to walk. This lot is where the former Washington School was located, which was just 4 houses down from the Croy house. Lily was walking along this sidewalk when the clubber jumped from a tree, very possibly this one. Her naked body would be found by her half-brother stuffed into the fire escape at the school. Her skull had been crushed by 8 blows. He would be questioned repeatedly over the following year, but never charged. A taxi driver would later come forward that he had picked up a fare at the corner of Palmwood and Collingwood, right in front of the school. He took the fare to a downtown hotel and said the man appeared to have blood on his coat. In the alley behind Washington Street, which is now just across the highway, a man found an iron bar covered in hair and blood. That weapon would also be believed to have been used in another murder of a woman the day following Croy's murder. An anonymous call from an interurban station sent police to the residence of George and Mary Alden, formerly located in this church parking lot roughly 2,500 feet from Washington School. Finding no signs of a disturbance, the police did not enter and left. When George returned home from work that night, he found his 47-year-old wife lying in the kitchen. It was initially believed she had been shot 3 times, but would later be determined to be from the lead pipe. Thrown into a panic again, the city council purchased 10 vehicles to be exclusively used in patrolling for the clubber. Also, 60 years before the FBI launched their behavioral analysis unit, psychologists came together to compile common characteristics among sex-distorted monsters to prepare an outline of the suspect police should be looking for. The streets were noted as being empty, with the only businesses thriving being taxicabs. Papers made note that husbands were being sent out to do the shopping, and stores were crowded with puzzled males who had never done grocery shopping before. While the Croy-Alden double murder would be the last attributed to the clubber, throughout November that year attacks were reported, such as the case of 18-year-old Doris McCrum, who rushed into her sister's home and fainted, only later admitting she had only imagined the scenario. Likewise, police were still holding the clubber as Toledo's boogeyman, attributing him to 7 arsons that occurred within 15 hours on November 22nd. The worst being the Mauk lumberyard, formerly located here, which burned to the ground and spread to the next door ice company, 2 other businesses, the City Street department stables, and 2 apartment buildings. When 2 men were found hacked to pieces on the former Trabic farm on November 26, police blamed the clubber for that as well. By this time, the clubber had spread like a disease throughout the state. Over 4 consecutive nights, women near Van Cleve High School in Troy, Ohio were terrorized by a man who scared one so bad she had a heart attack. In London, Ohio, a man with a club attacked a woman and a man out walking. After the male fled for his life, the woman was only saved after nearby residents rushed to her screaming. A man chased a woman with a club in Akron until her husband came to her aid and tackled the man by the throat. 19-year-old Beulah Purvis was dumped into the Big Miami River near Cleves after her skull was fractured, her jaw broken, and she was stabbed in the breast. An unidentified 25-year-old nurse was attacked with an iron pipe in Cleveland, but was chased off by a neighbor. Meanwhile, back in Toledo on November 26, police announced they had arrested 39-year-old Stoyan Krukovich for the murder of Mary Alden. He was identified as having rented a room from them the night prior and had gotten in a fight over the arrangements. It was also noted that he had been held secretly for 17 days before charging him, and no further papers mention him, so I can only assume he was released. On February 10th, 1927, 46-year-old Dave Price was arrested after he was caught concealing a club in his coat while walking the Clubber district at night. In 1929, 28-year-old Albert Wetzel reportedly confessed clubbing a woman to death in Toledo while he was incarcerated in Iowa, but would later retract this statement. The year prior, another man had confessed to the Croy murder and was considered to be the clubber by many. Stanley J. Hopp was a taxi driver returning home from a night of drinking when he kidnapped 7-year-old Dorothy Siligowski from her bed next door. After raping and strangling her to death with her bloomers, he would return to drop the body off on the porch. Teeth marks would convict him of the crime, and he would be sent to the electric chair, but not before also claiming to have murdered Lily Croy. A pen he gave his mother resembled one Lily had, but beyond that, nothing could be proven, and he was only convicted of Dorothy's murder. But there's one final suspect who we need to look at, and he has his own title, the Ferndale Ghoul. It was February 1927 when a boy was looking through the attic of his new home on Rymanville Avenue in Ferndale, Michigan when he opened a trunk. Inside were the skulls of 4 females wrapped in newspapers. Detectives tracked down the former occupant, James Coyner, who was serving time for grave robbing in Indiana. Previously arrested in 1918 for mailing obscene letters to women and voyeurism, police questioned him on a series of decapitated women found in Michigan City, but he refused to speak, only saying the heads were trophies he had gotten from robbing graves. Standing at 6.5 feet tall, the former auto worker for Ford Motors was said to have had the strength of 3 men, and the prison warden described him as a dangerous mental deficient. Though they found he had written letters to his sister asking her to retrieve the trunk and alluding to a dark secret, they could prove nothing. Toledo police learned he had been in town during one of the Clubber murders, but without his confession, he was released from Indiana in July 1934. 5 months later, Coyner, whose real name was Alonzo Robinson, would murder Aurelius Turner and his wife in Mississippi. He also attacked one of their sons with the same hammer, but the boy would survive. When he was caught, the salted and cured flesh of Mrs. Turner was found in his refrigerator. Over 200 National Guard troops were called to prevent a lynch mob from hanging him. He would tell police, "I could tell you a lot of things you'd like to know. A lot of things about murders and murderers, but I'll die first." The following year, he did, taking any further killings to the grave. In the time since, Toledo has forgotten about their boogeyman. The Clubber district is back to being called the Old West End. Were any of the men caught the Clubber? Did multiple murders all get attributed to one person? Whoever he was, it is unlikely we will ever know just how long the killer of those 4 women walked the streets of Toledo.